The Venom Trilogy has been controversial to say the least. If you look at the many critic scores of the film, they're all negative. They received a 30%, a 57%, and a 37% on Rotten Tomatoes as of me recording this, and even lower scores on Metacritic. But is the Venom Trilogy really that bad? I'm going to find out by going over each film, looking at what the general audience thought of each movie, and ultimately deciding if the Venom Trilogy is truly as awful as the critics say. I would best describe the first Venom movie as generic, especially the characters. Carlton Drake is one of the most run-of-the-mill milquetoast villains in any comic book film. He's pretty much just Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos or really any other billionaire who has an obsession with going to space. And Riz Ahmed gives the worst performance of his entire career.
I don't want to see you again unless you have Brock.
Which is really strange because he is a very talented actor. Seriously, if you haven't seen The Sound of Metal, you should. He is phenomenal in that movie. He's also very good in Nightcrawler, and Riot is also a laughably bad villain, but not in the same way. It's actually so funny how it took him 6 months. It took him 6 months. It took him so long to find his way to Drake and the other symbiotes. And when he finally makes it there, he's just like, what up? And he's not really a character, but I do think his design is pretty cool. Michelle Williams could do no wrong in my eyes, but Anne is just a generic ex-girlfriend character with no discernible traits. Same with her new boyfriend character whose name I don't remember. Let's just call him Denny. And Eddie Brock is again generic. He's a very typical good-natured but flawed character. Early in the film, there's this quick little montage of him doing good reporting so the audience knows he's a good dude. And then he looks into Anne's private work stuff to get info on Carlton Drake to show the audience that, gasp, he makes mistakes. And then he doesn't really get any more character growth after that. By the end of the film, he's still a mostly good guy who's flawed. But Tom Hardy still does a good job at making Eddie a little more likable, and he really delivers in the more funny moments. This is easily one of the ugliest superhero movies I have ever seen. When your main hero is all black, why would you make a movie with a color palette that is all black, brown, gray, and dark blue? I understand that the movie mostly takes place at night, but there are plenty of movies that take place at night, have a dark colored character, and yet have absolutely gorgeous color palettes. Take The Batman, for example. That movie is gorgeous and full of color, but Venom is just dull. But I will say most of the CGI is very well done. A lot of the earlier scenes in the movie look fantastic. The scene where Eddie fully transforms into Venom for the first time is iconic because of how good the visuals look. The line he says is also pretty memorable, I guess. He says something about nibbling on this guy's toes or whatever. But then the CGI is also pretty bad at times, most notably during the final action sequence. The whole final fight is terrible, with these piles of goop slamming into each other. I like my superheroes drippy, bruh. On paper, it's an interesting idea to have Eddie and Drake fight each other while inside of their respective symbiotes, but the execution just wasn't there. The best thing I can say about this movie is that I think Eddie and Venom work pretty well as a duo. A lot of the film's comedy and entertainment value comes from these two, but their relationship is weirdly written. They have this really strange fight where Dr. Denny says Venom is killing Eddie, so he gets mad and storms off. Then Venom bonds with Anne to get back to Eddie, and then Eddie just forgets about the whole killing thing. I guess when he was sucking face with Venom, he just got over all of his past issues. And then at the end of the film, Venom decides to sacrifice himself for Eddie, but not really, because Venom is fine, I guess, even though fire is supposed to kill him, but I don't know. These two have a wildly inconsistent story in the first film. Venom is not a movie I enjoy very much, and it just gets worse every time I watch it. So I'm going to give it a 3 out of 10. But what did other people think about the first Venom? The film received a very positive audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, with a lot of reviews saying that the film was entertaining, but also flawed. Not particularly great, but Tom Hardy is exceptional when it comes to acting, and that definitely boosts the film overall. Some clever scenes and effects, but it lacks a deep story. Some of it feels like nonsense, but I would definitely recommend giving it a watch. Others felt the film was missing an R rating. It's great to see this portrayal of Venom done right, and it is very fun at times, but it's extremely generic, turns Venom into too much of an anti-hero, and suffers from the PG-13 shackles. But others loved the film and gave it glowing reviews. Good, spirited, hilarious, and heartful take on the character of Eddie Brock. But then this guy named Jackoff F posted a 5-star review that is just the Venom Eminem lyrics. Absolute legend. So while most audiences felt differently, I have to agree with the critics and say that the first Venom film is as bad as they say. Now let's see if the next film is any better.
Until we've uncovered the
I haven't seen Venom Let There Be Carnage since it first came out in theaters, and I honestly didn't remember a lot about this movie, even though it only came out 3 years ago. But after rewatching it, I was surprised with how much I liked it. It's not the best movie I've ever seen, but it's leagues better than the first Venom. First of all, the villain is so much better. Cletus Cassidy is an actual character compared to Carlton Drake. He has outlined motivations, a personality, real human characteristics. He's a sadistic, murderous lunatic, but he's still a character. And I think Woody Harrelson is actually pretty good in the movie. He really captures those psychotic mannerisms. Also, Cletus and Shriek have a surprisingly well-developed romance. There's more chemistry between these two than Eddie and Anne. Heck, there's more chemistry between these two than the DCEU's Joker and Harley.
You are my guests to this handsome hunka.
Why the f would he say that?
And when Cletus fully transforms into Carnage, he looks awesome. I love how they made this version of the character larger than Venom, and all the tendrils, teeth, and weapons add 1,000 aura. He also has one of the best sounding roars in all of cinema. I really love how Cletus transforms into Carnage. Instead of the symbiote enveloping and covering him, like what Venom does to Eddie, Carnage bursts out of Cletus in a way that looks really painful. However, I really don't like how they made Carnage and Cletus distinctively different characters. In the comics, the two are so symbiotic that they are pretty much the exact same person. And in the film, them being two characters who argue and bicker with one another makes them way less threatening, especially since that ends up being the thing that defeats them in the end. Venom and Eddie have a much better story in this film. They have a somewhat well-realized arc of learning to really appreciate one another and come to an understanding that they're at their best together. At the beginning of the movie, Eddie doesn't appreciate all the things that Venom does for him, like keeping him healthy and alive or helping him solve the mystery of where Cletus buried all those bodies. And Venom doesn't appreciate all the things that Eddie has done for him, like keeping him hidden from the public eye and giving him a home on Earth. Their story has a really strong setup, but not a whole lot of follow through. In the time that they separate and then come together before the final battle, they really don't have a ton of development, outside of a scene where Eddie half-ass apologizes to Venom. But still, I think both characters are still much stronger in this film. Also, this film visually looks so much better than the first. This time it was directed by Andy Serkis, which is interesting, especially since he is not directing the third film in this series, but is instead starring as a certain god of the symbiotes. Only he could play a super powerful god and Alfred Pennyworth at the exact same time. This is one of only 4 movies he has ever directed, and I have to say he did a good job. There are tons of well-directed sequences, and this shot of Carnage in the church is an all-timer. The cinematography is nice. This is a much more vibrant and colorful film compared to the first, although the CGI is iffy at times. But the absolute worst part about this movie has to be the pacing. This movie is an hour and a half long for some reason, and because it's so short, it zooms through all the story elements really quickly. And there are a ton of characters who really shouldn't be in this movie that eat up screen time. Why are Anne and Dr. Denny still here? They didn't really add much to the original film, and they're just as boring here. And there's a whole storyline with this detective character who had a past run-in with Shriek in the film's opening scene, and he's also just really bland and adds nothing interesting to the film. He just eats up screen time. All in all, I think Venom Let There Be Carnage is an imperfect movie, but it's still really fun. It has some great action, and it's considerably better than the first film. So I'm going to give Venom Let There Be Carnage a 6.5 out of 10. The film received a slightly better audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, with some audiences saying, improvement, still a silly comic book movie. It has strong action and a really strong villain that feels like a real threat. I was thoroughly entertained, but I don't claim it to be masterclass writing or anything. But others thought the film wasn't dark enough, especially with the inclusion of Carnage. This movie should have been amazing, but sadly, it wasn't. It was very boring, and I just felt like they could have made Carnage darker and more evil. But the overwhelming sentiment is that the film is really only serviceable. Okay film that passes time. Has some solid parts, definitely not amazing, but definitely not bad. It's a solid, good enough film. And then of course you have your movie was so bad I had to ask for my money back type of reviews. Which, speaking of, has anyone actually gotten their money back? Is that something you can do? Cinemark's policy is that you can only request a refund before the movie showtime, and it's the same with AMC and Regal. So what movie theaters are you guys going to that will give you a refund after you watch the movie? Anyway, it seems like I'm more in sync with the audience with this one, and I believe that Venom Let There Be Carnage is better than the critics say. But before we move on to the final film of the trilogy, I just want to say, if you've enjoyed this video so far, why not hit that subscribe button? We are on the road to 100,000 subscribers, and once we hit that goal, I'll release a ranking of of the entire Star Wars franchise. All the movies, all the shows, all the things I don't want to watch. So if you want to see that video, make sure you're subscribed. Now let's see if the final Venom movie is truly as bad as they say. And just a warning, there will be spoilers ahead. I didn't really expect much from Venom: The Last Dance. I expected a reasonably fun movie that's kind of a mess, and that's what I got. But the one thing I had sorta high hopes for was Noel, and I was kinda let down. Noel doesn't really do anything in the film outside of sending these alien dog things after Venom and sitting in this chair. The opening scene of the film is his introduction, and it's really funny. Noel pretty much just says, "Hi, I'm Noel, and I'm trapped in this prison, and I need the codex to free myself, so I'm gonna send these weird dog things to go find the codex." I don't know why I did a Moist Critical voice, but whatever. That scene and many others are examples of one of my biggest issues with the movie, and that's the overuse of exposition. Characters are constantly explaining what's happening to the audience, which stops the story from having a natural flow. But I think the added lore of Noel and the codex gives the film some really high stakes. As we learn in a different expositional scene, Venom and Eddie have the codex within them, and the only way to prevent Noel from freeing himself is if either Venom or Eddie die, which would destroy the codex. This story element creates a really interesting conflict with our main characters, who, by the way, are still the best part of this franchise. Eddie and Venom are both so well characterized here. There are moments where they both express how they want lives different from the ones they currently have, and this movie builds upon what was set up in the last two by really testing the bond these two have with each other. They face all the challenges presented to them throughout the story together, as a team, as lethal protectors, which makes the ending that much more heartbreaking when Venom sacrifices himself for Eddie and the entire world. I honestly didn't think this was gonna tug on my heartstrings, but it kinda did. This was a really nice send-off for this duo. But this is a Venom movie, and these two are dumber than a sack of potatoes. One of the rules we learn in this film is that these crazy alien monsters can only track Venom and Eddie when Venom is in his true form, which at first seems like an interesting challenge for our heroes to overcome. But then Venom decides, YOLO, I'm gonna go in my true form because I wanna dance. Now, don't get me wrong, I am no resident of the Footloose town. I love me a good dance sequence now and then, but I'm sorry. Having the main character break such an important rule just to have a dance sequence and to have one of the aliens find him and progress the plot is just lazy writing. But the one aspect about the dance scene that I have no complaints about is Mrs. Chen, baby. I have not mentioned Mrs. Chen until now, but I love how she's become a mainstay character in this franchise. She's such a funny side character, and her cameo in Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse is gold. If this is the last time we see Mrs. Chen, I'm glad she really went out with a bang. I think the action here might be the best in the whole trilogy. There are a few scenes sprinkled out that I think are a blast. I would consider the last 25 minutes of this film to be phenomenal. Some of the best action I've seen all year. Now, you might be thinking that my coverage of this film is pretty positive so far, but everything I've said is only like half the movie. The other half of Venom: The Last Dance is pretty darn awful. Because Eddie and Venom are thrown into new locations, there are a bunch of new characters. And oh boy, they really are something. Firstly, there's this family who really want to see an alien. The father is played by Rhys Ifans, but he's not the lizard this time. And then the mom is played by the mom from the Ted series. And I think this family is fun and a welcome addition to the film. But then they stay around. After they drop off Eddie in Las Vegas, they should have just left the movie. But no, they overstay their welcome and stick around until the very end of the film and get themselves into danger in the most annoying ways. But they're not even the worst characters. The Area 55 characters are truly awful. Chiwetel Ejiofor plays an incredibly generic military guy who wants to kill all aliens because they kill all our friends. And then there are these scientist characters who are just weird for some reason. One of them is played by Juno Temple, and she was just awful. I don't even know what kind of character they were going for with her, but she ends up as Agony, I guess, so good for her. And we spend a lot of time with these characters who are learning about the Noel lore at the same time that we're also learning the same information from Eddie and Venom. So these characters and their story just feels redundant. The last thing I'll say about Venom: The Last Dance is that while the script is really messy and there are a bunch of bland characters, this is still a pretty fun movie. So I'm going to give it a 5 out of 10. The Last Dance received a lower audience score on Rotten Tomatoes than the other two Venom films, and it's for sure the most controversial film of the series, with some fans saying felt rushed and disjointed. Great FX, disappointing way to end the trilogy, First one, still the best, but some thought the film was really touching. I think the movie was amazing. It was a mix of emotion and goofiness. The death of Venom almost left me in tears, but there could hopefully be a lot more done with the character in the future. And then there's comparisons to a certain other October comic book movie. At least it was better than Joker 2. But a lot of the reviews mention how the critics are wrong and this is actually a really good movie. This is where Rotten Tomatoes fails. Most of the time, the critics don't understand what a movie like this is supposed to be. And like the other two, this one delivers. Definitely must watch for the fans. But what do I think? Is Venom: The Last Dance and the whole trilogy as a whole better than the critics say? I think these movies are better than they say. The Venom Trilogy isn't amazing. These are not peak cinema, but there's a lot of love behind these films, and they genuinely are a really fun time under the right circumstances. But what do you guys think? Do you agree with the critics and think these movies are just terrible, or do you find enjoyment out of them? Let me know down below. And if you want to watch another video about different Marvel movies, you can click on this video to watch my ranking of every X-Men film, or you can click on this video that YouTube picked out just for you.